Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. In both our Old Testament and our New Testament reading, we have stumbling blocks being mentioned. In Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 14, the Israelites were told not to put a stumbling block before a blind person, and they were to fear God. And you can imagine how cruel it would be for an individual to put a stumbling block before a blind person. Probably presuming that they could get away with it because the blind person can't see them do it. But the encouragement would be, hey, you need to fear God and know that God sees it, even if the blind person isn't able to. But you can think about, how cruel it would be to do such a thing to a blind person. And you can imagine someone doing that and just how mean and cruel that would be. But in Matthew chapter 18 and verse 7, we see that there's another way that you can cause a person to stumble, and that is to stumble spiritually. In Leviticus 19 and verse 14, of course, it's talking about causing someone to physically stumble. But in Matthew chapter 18, we see the danger or the cruelty of causing a person to stumble spiritually. And there's a call for us to not allow ourselves to stumble, not to allow things into our lives that would cause us to stumble. We can be cruel to ourselves by allowing stumbling blocks into our own lives that would cause us to stumble, to cause us to sin against God, to cause us to begin to go in the wrong direction. This is what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 18 and verse 7. Woe to the world because of its stumbling blocks, for it is inevitable that stumbling blocks come. Nevertheless, woe to that man through whom the stumbling block comes. Going back to the blind man in Leviticus, it's inevitable that there are stumbling blocks. If a person is blind, it's inevitable that they're going to eventually run across something that might cause them to stumble. This world is full of things that can trip a person, even a person who can see. And so much more a person who's blind. It's inevitable that there's stumbling blocks. But in Leviticus, the commandment is against the person who causes the stumbling block, who purposely puts the stumbling block there. But then Jesus takes it a step further and says, you also need to protect yourself and not put a stumbling block before yourself or allow stumbling blocks to be put in your own path. He says, and if your hand or your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it from you. It is better for you to enter life crippled or lame than having 2 hands or 2 feet to be cast into eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to stumble, tear it out and throw it from you. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than having 2 eyes to be cast into the fiery hell. So the encouragement here by the Lord is, to say, you need to rid yourself of all stumbling blocks. However cool it might be putting a stumbling block before a blind person and causing them to physically stumble, how much more cruel is it to ourselves when we allow stumbling blocks all the time in our lives that cause us to stumble, that trip us up and cause us to perhaps fall into sin? We need to show ourselves some kindness and say, you know what, I don't want to have these stumbling blocks in my life. I don't want anything that's going to hinder me from going the way of Christ. I want to be able to follow the Lord in freedom and without hindrance. And therefore, I'm going to get rid of every stumbling block that I have in my life. Now, you can't completely get rid of stumbling blocks. As Jesus says, it's inevitable that stumbling blocks are going to come from the world. But why would we purposely allow stumbling blocks in our lives? And we might do this all the time, maybe even without even thinking about it. A lot of times, if we think about, especially the sins that we commit time and time again, these habitual sins that we engage in time and time again, a lot of them can be traced back to a stumbling block. Maybe one single stumbling block, or maybe multiple stumbling blocks. But it's important for us to trace it back to, okay, what is really causing this? What really causes me to get so angry, or whatever the case may be, and to trace it back to that stumbling block, and then to do whatever we can to rid ourselves of those stumbling blocks whenever it's in our power to do so. Jesus would encourage us to say, look, your spiritual condition is way more important than these stumbling blocks, and just keeping these things around that, yes, might have some some degree of value, but compared to, the eternal life, they really have no value at all and ought to be disposed of so that you can walk more freely before the Lord. So hopefully today we'll be encouraged to not cause stumbling blocks to be placed in other people's lives, but also not to allow stumbling blocks to be placed in our own lives, and to protect ourselves from these stumbling blocks, to be aware of them, to beware of them, and to allow ourselves more freedom before the Lord. In Hebrews chapter 12, we're told that we are to lay aside every encumbrance and the sin that so easily entangles us, and let us run the race, fixing our eyes on Christ. And that's what we should desire, and that's what we should be working towards. And I think Jesus' teachings help us to be encouraged to do that. So here's some things we can reflect on and think about as we do our reading today. With that, guys, I do thank you for watching the video today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.